Hello, everyone. Welcome to this episode of About Time. This is the next one in my series of conversations with people I've worked with over the years who I find inspiring and brilliant to work with. And today's guest is Alex Steele of Improvise. Alex, brilliant to see you.
It's lovely to see you too. I was just saying to Chris, to the listeners and the viewers, that I can't hear out of this ear today, which is kind of a bit of a problem for a musician. But there's a lesson in this. You go with what's working, and I can hear perfectly out of this ear. So I'm sure we're going to have a great conversation today, Chris.
Yeah, and uh, and you've got a gig tonight as well. So you've got a one-eared gig this evening.
I've already thought about how to position my piano so that my ear is facing in the right direction.
The things you have to think about, right? So, Alex, it's just brilliant that you could come on because when I decided to do this series of um, conversations with people I've worked with, you were like an automatic choice because I have known you and your work with the jazz band and exec ed and organisational groups for 20 years, maybe.
Probably
Yeah,
yes.
yeah, and we met through Ashridge. But had you been doing that work in organisations before your connection to Ashridge?
Ashridge is where it happened for the first time. In
Was
fact,
it? Okay.
there
Yeah.
was uh, there was one of your colleagues at that time that I happened to know because I taught him the piano, and I mentioned this idea
That
that I
must
had.
be Hugh Pigeon.
That is correct, and I
Yes.
said I've got this idea that maybe there is some value in exploring how jazz musicians interact and connect and collaborate and
Yeah.
improvise together, and how we might apply that kind of thinking within teams and organisations. So the first experiment that I did was with through Hugh at Ashford all those years ago. Do you think it's useful for me to tell a little bit about my backstory?
I think it would be brilliant. That was going to be my next question. So I won't even ask you. What is the next question, Alex?
I'll tell you about the question is how did you come to be who you are? And it's interesting because I did start life as a musician, uh, and currently it's always been really important to me. But I've had at least two careers running in parallel for many years. So I grew up in a family of musicians. My late father and my late mother were both professional musicians. They had brothers and sisters who were also professional musicians. My grandparents were professional musicians, and music was the language of the household. So I just grew up with it. And it was a beautiful way to grow up with instruments in the house. And I guess I don't know what my first language is, whether it's English or jazz, because I was playing before I could talk. And
Yeah.
so I had this kind of life as a musician as a child.
Well, Alex, when you say you were playing before you could talk, what were you playing? Where did you start as an instrument? Was it tapping the piano or?
Well, yeah, piano was the most accessible, as were drums. So
Yeah.
drums you can bang, pianos you can go. Eh. Whereas obviously I'm a multi instrumentalist. Although professionally I'm really a piano player or a keyboard player, but I do play guitar and saxophone and the bass and the clarinet, and
Yeah.
but those are just part of the environment I grew up in. But yeah, to play as a baby, it's things you can poke and prod and make a
Yeah.
noise with. Because I often say it's the same as learning your first language anyway. You just kind of make noise and you get some
Yeah.
affirmation from others or not,
Yeah.
and you
No,
kind of learn.
brilliant. Sorry, I interrupted you. You said so
That's
music was
okay.
like there from babyhood, your first
That's right.
language. Yeah.
But what was interesting was my father. I remember he said to me, music is it's a challenging profession. If you have any other passions in your life, pursue them as well. He didn't say let go of the music. He said just pursue them as well. So I took his advice, and as a young man, I travelled a lot as a backpacker in my 20s, travelling around the world, and I developed this passion for nature, environmental conservation, sustainable development. So my first degree was in environmental sciences, and in my early career, I worked as an environmental management consultant and sustainability consultant and trainer, and this was therefore I had a double life at the time, gigs by night and trying to save the world by day. But what I found fascinating about that time of my life, which was both partly as a consultant, partly as an academic as well, was that the key challenge to make a difference in the world, it wasn't really understanding the science of, say, climate change. It's not difficult, or other kind of environmental sciences. They're quite logical. But the challenge is, how do you get people to change their behaviour in order to bring about change that then results in sustainability? And this is the problem that we all have. We're all reluctant to change in lots of ways, which causes consumption of finite resources and emissions and so on.
Yeah.
So, and also later, I've kind of developed an interest in psychology, applied positive psychology and organisational psychology, where I continued my studies. And so, for a long time, I had these two worlds of working by day as an academic and as a consultant around sustainability, but behavioural change as well in psychology, and then by night playing jazz. And then, as you mentioned right at the beginning, I approached Hugh. I knew Hugh Pidgeon at Ashridge, and I said, I've got this idea that there's something valuable to explore in this interface between the jazz world and the organisation. And that takes up, in terms of what I do today, I still still do some environmental consultancy work, and I'm also still involved in related to that international development and community development work.
Yes.
Currently developing a new project in Nepal, a lot of work in Uganda, Venezuela, Colombia, Kenya, Bangladesh.
Wow. Okay.
And I'm a visiting professor. I still have academic roles as a visiting professor in one institution, as a visiting fellow in another. But, by night, as it will be tonight with my one ear, I'll be just doing a regular gig. So I travel around the world. I work with many large organisations, and I design these experiential pieces where I invite, I work with, it might be with one organisation or with a group of organisations, and I invite them to kind of take a journey inside the minds and the hearts of jazz musicians, because even if someone says they like jazz, they don't necessarily know what's happening, because the improvisational nature of jazz is hugely significant. I mean, jazz is mostly improvised, whereas if you go to a rock and roll concert or whatever you're into, or classical concert, you kind of know what you're going to get almost note for note, whereas we don't really know what notes are going to arise. So there's that key lesson there about how do you navigate uncertainty and complexity and ambiguity. And I invite people to kind of come inside the music to understand how we sense not just ourselves, but each other and the audience. There's a big system here of interaction. And I get participants to either control the music, the musicians, or to disrupt the music in different ways. And you've seen some of this. As a way of demonstrating the human behaviours and the collective human behaviours that jazz musicians possess. And then I say, how might you, the participants, apply that thinking or those ideas or those behaviours in the real world? And that's where the kind of conversation begins. So my work is a mixture of facilitation and training. I also do a lot of coaching work as well now.
Yes.
But it's also creating live musical experiences, because that medium of music, I think, is very unique. I do remember I was thinking of artful knowing was a term that you had, wasn't it?
I mean, I come from an action research background where the whole theme of extended epistemology matters, which is, all the richer ways of knowing, and a view that you can't see enough of a system just by looking at it through one partial lens. For example, analytical language, logic. You need more ways of seeing a system. So I always, for years, have worked with poetry, story, embodied movement, dance, acting, and music is one of those. Although I'm not a musician, I do the grounded creativity work with Mark, where it's very simple instruments like wooden frogs and things you can bang, which, the less qualified you are, the better. And all of that matters in terms of seeing a system. But I think your work does that. But I think your work also is a powerful educational intervention, and a powerful systems intervention in a different way, in that you've got these you live experiments you carry out, and I've seen that do such brilliant work with groups. I mean, how did you invent that? Because you've got like 4 or 5 windows that you regularly invite people to experiment with. I mean, how did you invent it, and how did it all come about?
Well, it's still ongoing, and I
Yeah,
guess from the very beginning, I just wanted ways for people to be inside the music in a way that they might not have been before. I even
yeah,
invite, as I think I know you've seen, I invite beginners
yes. I've done
to
it.
engage with the music. There you
I've
go.
done it. I've been the beginner who's come up and played a duet.
And it's a
Yeah,
beautiful thing, isn't
it's
it?
amazing, astonishing. Yeah,
Because often it's interesting as well because a lot of the work that I do in terms of positive psychology is around positive emotion. And what kind of
mm,
emotions can we amplify to create human and organizational flourishing, and to bring people into the music as a beginner, because I often talk about the value of the beginner's mind,
yeah,
letting go of expertise, but to work with a real beginner really reminds people of how that feels. So
mm,
this whole experience, I think, is can be hugely emotional. I've had people, it happens all the time, that they kind of
mm,
they're in tears because they get this insight into who they are and how they
yeah,
connect with others, and it's about empathy and it's about trust, it's about love. I mean, I did an event in Belgium last week, and I don't know if you've seen me do this live, but occasionally I do to talk about human sensing. I
mm.
do a musical portrait. I think we did it once, didn't we, on
We
screen,
we
which
have
was
done
also
it.
beautiful.
We did it on a game shift pop up of some kind, and you did a musical portrait of our partner Julie Dryburgh. Yeah,
That was an incredible thing. So
yes,
imagine that now in a live setting where you're physically in front of the person. It takes it to another level again. And
yeah,
somebody volunteered the other day at this event. I was at it in Belgium, and he said afterwards, because he was very emotional about it, as were the 200 people that were watching.
mm,
And people coming up to me, and but most important, the guy who was receiving this
mm,
experience for lots of good reasons around leadership and collaboration and flourishing. He said to me, as you looked at me and the other musicians, I felt these were his words, this unconditional love from me to him. And I thought, wow, because when you do this, when you improvise, you're connected to something.
mm,
In this case, the person that was receiving this gift, and in that moment of being present and connection, I mean, nothing else. You're in flow in terms of the work of
mm.
Mihai Csikszentmihalyi and others.
Yes, yeah,
That ability to be in flow is something that we're not very good at sometimes in real life. But music is something that really grounds us and brings us into the moment. I guess it's a mindfulness practice, jazz improvisation in itself. Also watching the jazz, but when someone is actually inside the music or is the subject of a piece of music, it's it's an experience I think that most people wouldn't normally have. And of course,
yeah,
I'm talking about this, and the listeners and the viewers will be saying, "Well, what's that got to do with leadership or
yeah. What has
whatever?"
it got to do with leadership? Tell us.
Well,
What has it?
it's about exploring. This is the thing about music, I think, which
Yeah,
I get excited about, even with one ear. That it's a therapeutic experience. I think to be involved in one of these experiential workshops,
yeah,
um,
yeah,
be it's not thinking about it. It's feeling what it's like to be
mm,
connected to others, whether someone's doing a musical portrait of you, or you're a beginner on a piano, or you're controlling or disrupting the music. To feel that you're part of the music, and you're shaping the story that's being told in the music.
yes, yeah,
Um, but yeah, in terms of organizations and teams, it's a way for people to reflect on what does it mean to be human, and what does it mean to
mm,
be connected. And improvisation is something you can do alone as a piano player,
mm,
but most of the fun comes from improvising with others,
yeah,
and that those relationships and connectivity are what make teams and
yeah,
organizations flourish.
yeah. And I love the, and I hadn't thought about this at all when I first met you. You know, it's a very long time ago, but over time, I've come to see the work that you do and the work that I do when I'm working with, say, Doug and Art, or with Mark and the wooden frog type improvisation, as it's a really powerful way of getting people to experience and then to explore how we create a container in which it becomes possible to see something differently and to for something new to come about. And for me, there's links to Michael Chaskalson's work around mindfulness and allowing and curiosity, and around John and Megan's work on the relationship between spaciousness and the ability of people to speak up. And your work has connections to all of that.
Yes, yeah, and that's and I love designing and delivering these sessions in collaboration with all of the people you just mentioned and many others
You know,
to build connections for participants in these learning experiences to see how it relates to mindfulness, for example, and many other disciplines. And it's
yeah,
that
and
interdisciplinary thing which is beautiful.
it is. And one of my particular interests of the moment is when you're getting, and this is very much a corporate thing, when you're trying to create genuinely distributed leadership and genuinely participative strategy work or change work. And as a CEO, you have got interest in how do I make sure that 1,000 people join in thinking about strategy and change. There's a dance between control and collaboration. It's not that you just give everything away and there's no control at all. And it's not that you control everything, because if you do, there's no collaboration. It's that very fine edge of there's a fine shift of power and actually a very important wisdom in how you use power. And I think your exercise in the jazz band, well, first of all, jazz has that all the time alive in it.
Yes,
And you would do an exercise to make it visible to people by using the hats and the touching.
that's
Yeah, but
that's right.
but you live it. I mean, tonight when you're playing, you won't be using hats to say who's leading, but you know that all the time, don't you? And
Yes.
I wonder how do you know it?
Well, this is interesting, isn't it? And
Yeah,
because we sense each other by listening. That's that here,
with that
and
here, yeah,
by seeing. In fact, there's an experiment I do a lot recently where we actually blindfold musicians and participants that control us. So we only focus on listening to see if we can still control and make the music beautiful, which still works. This is really another kind of story. But what was I going to say about that? But yeah, it's about how will it work this evening.
yeah,
It's that combination of not just seeing, not just listening, but how you sense another human being. It's something that isn't just listening or seeing, and then there's that kind of interplay between, as you mentioned, leading and following, or being quiet and saying nothing. It's the gaps and the silence which are equally important. But how does it work? Well, it's in the same way that we have a conversation. I always say that jazz is just a language, and you're observing a conversation between four people. It's slightly different to a normal conversation because mostly we don't talk over each other, but of course it can happen accidentally. But with four musicians, we are kind of all making beautiful sounds at the same time. So there are these different levels in the jazz conversation, some of which are more supporting and following, some of which are more controlling and leading. But I was going to say, you reminded me there as well. I've had discussions recently with organisations about polarities and paradoxes. I go, "Ooh, what's
yeah,
this?"
yeah,
And you've got these kind of polarities or paradoxes in jazz. For example,
yeah,
when are you going to be in control and lead, and when are you going to decide to let go,
yeah.
or this? I heard this concept of freedom in the frame. So you've got a
Mm.
frame, but you've got freedom within it. So that's one of those kind of
I've
paradoxes,
I've
maybe.
heard I've heard the expression freedom in a frame quite often in the last year
Yeah,
or two. It's obviously come into the field of organisational work in quite a big way.
yeah. So I can demonstrate that through the jazz, because I would say that when we play jazz, the frame, the structure of the piece only represents maybe 5% of what people are listening to, and the freedom is the other 95% of what happens, which is the improvisation, which is like this conversation, right? Because we arrive with, well, in fact, this is maybe just 100% improvisation. It's just the freedom. I don't think we've got a frame, but generally in jazz we do have a frame, and I think for organisations that clearly there are frames, because there are structures, there are procedures and processes, and there's legal constraints, there are systems, and how do you navigate, and how far can you push it
Yeah.
to improvise within those constraints or those structures? Because when you do decide to improvise, you are you can't be risk averse. You've got to be open to the unexpected, and I think interesting. I was thinking about that the other day with beginner's mind, because if you haven't got the beginner's mind, you're kind of doing things the same way over and over again, and so you're not really taking any risks. And where the beginner's mind is where you are experimenting much more. You've got much more freedom. But there was a story that was told to me the other day. It's a new story that I tell, which was the story of a bass player called Gary Peacock, who all the jazz listeners and viewers will go, oh yeah, Gary Peacock, very famous bass player, played with Keith Jarrett a lot.
Right.
The piano player played with Miles Davis. But he told this story of where he and others arrived in a recording studio to record an album of jazz standards with the great Miles Davis, and all the musicians were kind of relaxed. They all kind of rocked up because they were playing songs they played hundreds of times, thousands of times before, and so and there's a danger in that, isn't there? Because then you could be playing it kind of the same old way. You're not really stepping out of your comfort zone. So what Gary Peacock said was that Miles Davis arrived in the studio and said, "Hi guys, welcome to the recording session." And he said, "What I want to hear you play today is what you don't know." And he paused, and they said, "What did he say?" "What I want to hear you play is what you don't know." And this was a kind of an invitation for them to kind of jump into the unknown and to let go of any preconceived ideas they had of how this music should sound, even though they played it these songs many times before. And Gary Peacock in this interview said it made them listen really deeply to and to be much more present than they might normally be, and connected to each other. But he did say in doing that there was a feeling of vulnerability that they had as musicians, and this is something I think, of course, if you ask someone to
Yeah.
engage with this freedom or delve into the uncertainty in the real world, there can be some fear, and if you were to step in front of a group of people and say, I don't know what's happening here, you are going to feel vulnerable. But I think if this is discussed as a phenomenon, and you have trust between people, you get psychological safety. Again, psychological
Yeah.
safety is discussed a lot now.
Yeah. I mean, I think this is incredibly important because when we turn up and run a company, and launch a product or invent a change to make, let's say, I'm working with universities at the moment, and a lot of the universities are responding to an immediate crisis and trying to think, what does a university need to be for 2035, and how do we lead a change that gets us ready for that? Nobody knows. Nobody knows what a university really needs to be in 2035. So
Well,
we've
that's right.
always, but it's very hard if you're, the chair of the council or the head of the audit to not know, because you're
Yeah,
actually paid to know, and you've got some legal responsibilities that assume knowing some stuff, and that's a kind of a knife edge, isn't it? Of you are in
yeah,
charge, but you're not in control.
yeah. That's
Yeah,
right. Because creativity and innovation come from that place of not knowing if it's
yeah,
real innovation, because it's creating things for the first time. And
yeah,
another part of the jazz thing, which I think is really important, or the improvisational mindset, is is around judgment. Because when you're talking about creativity and innovation, or let's say a radical idea is proposed within an organisation. I mean, if you look around us at all of the products and tools and innovations, when they started, there might have been some reluctance in society, to say, like, what's that thing that you're trying to do? And so the improvisational mindset is quite good at exploring this idea of how do you judge, or when should you judge, or should you judge at all when these radical ideas emerge? And the way that jazz works, it's because when radical ideas are created in the moment, we don't run away from them, we don't judge them, we accept them, and we are curious, and we have this culture of curiosity, experimentation, exploration. We have psychological safety, we trust each other, and collectively we move forward. And we don't judge. We might judge eventually, but we don't judge too soon. And again, the famous story is the one of Herbie Hancock, the piano player in his early career, when he played a lot of wrong notes in a concert with Miles Davis. And in that moment, Miles Davis turned around with his trumpet and played all the wrong notes back to Herbie Hancock live as they're doing the performance. And they kind of, well, I guess the mission of a jazz musician is to find beauty in the unexpected, which is a kind of an interesting, a valuable take to have on life in general. Look for the beauty in the unexpected. And in that moment, they created a new song based upon these notes, which they weren't even wrong. There's no such thing as a wrong note in jazz. They were just unexpected. And it's an interesting thing to explore in organizations and in life.
But that's true in all kinds of innovation, where the unexpected is incredibly important. And at the same time, like, I've done lots of work over the years in pharmaceuticals. There's a time where you can't have the wrong notes, right? When you're producing the drug, you don't want the wrong notes. But when you're doing your research, or when you're thinking about how we organize our social media and marketing for the next 10 years, you need the wrong notes. Otherwise, you'll never get anything new.
Well, that's right. Well, even in, I suppose, in pharmaceuticals, it's interesting, that one, because you might get a medicine produced for one particular reason, and it might have side effects that people didn't expect, positive or negative. And the classic example, I think, is Viagra. So, that wasn't manufactured initially for the purpose it's used for today.
No, I actually worked with a company that had to make the decision as to whether they were going to pursue that therapeutic line, because it wasn't in their strategy and they chose not to. And of course, the company that did pursue that therapeutic line, and it wasn't in their strategy, made a shed load of money. And that was an improvisation. Oh, it's not on our plan. Oh, it's not on our plan, but it's good. Let's go with the wrong note. That's really interesting. And it also, incidentally, Alex, led to me doing an interesting gig, because I did the Pfizer Viagra tour. I was their OD consultant, going around GPs and district nurses, and me and a sex therapist, taking various prosthetic penises around the country.
Oh, wow.
To talk. So I did the Viagra tour. That was one of my
I didn't know that.
It was a great fun gig. I did it for I don't know, half a dozen gigs around the country, introducing Viagra to GPs.
That's great. If only you told me at the time, I'd have written a little song as well. But there you go.
Yeah, but now we've been talking for about half an hour, and we could talk for ages about the jazz. But I know that you've also been doing a master's degree, and I want you to say something about that, because I'm sure it related to your music, but it wasn't specifically about the music. I mean, what was that all about?
There are two parts to it that I'll share quickly. One was that as a practitioner, mostly, it's really, I think, really good to immerse yourself in research mindsets and thinking, the ability to gather evidence about whatever it is you do, to see how well it works and to learn from others. So this was really cool, and I recommend doing as many master's degrees as you can do in your life, because it's just a really lovely way to deeply immerse yourself. But more importantly, perhaps, or equally as important as that, for me, to engage in the language of positive psychology, which this master's degree was about, was what helped me give a new words to things I was already explaining, whether that's with or without the music. So positive psychology is about our strength. It's about positive emotions. It's about gratitude. It's about curiosity. It's about resilience. It's about flow. And there's a whole kind of science of human well-being and flourishing, which is not just about individual flourishing, but it's about collective flourishing. So when we look at how teams work and organizations work, that's what I found to be really useful. So it's enhanced, my work. I have a new set of concepts and constructs and theories I can dip in and out of. And also, again, many practitioners in our community will use this. If you're using appreciative inquiry, for example, or in my
Yes.
case, I do solution focused coaching. It's the same kind of approach, focusing on what's working, doing more of that, amplifying that, and kind of the conventional psychology is more, problem focused. I guess it's about how do you get from a period of poor, from a position of not being in great shape to being normal, and whereas positive psychology is about how do you get from normal to be flourishing and thriving, and that's
Yeah.
what attracted me to that particular program of study. So that was the journey for me, and of course I spent the whole time doing research on the things that I do. So what is the impact of immersing a group of individuals in a musical improvisational experience? So the data, and I had the privilege of interviewing many people from organisations to say, what impact did this experience make, and what are you doing differently as a result of this cultivating improvisational mindsets for you
Brilliant.
personally and within your team and
Brilliant.
within
I
your
mean, that's
organisation.
so good.
And I have
And
to say, it
there's,
inspired me to so we're overlapping slightly. I'll just finish that bit. It's inspired me to write a book, which I'm doing at the moment to capture this for a larger audience, less academic.
yeah. Alex, we are struggling so much with the internet today. I just want to say thank you for carrying on where we've been battling the internet. I wonder, would you be willing, because I just love it when you play the music, would you be willing to close off this podcast by playing something for us? And can I just say thank
I
you so much for being here and for putting up with your lack of hearing, cat who has died, and the fact that the internet is fundamentally broken. We've still managed to do this. So thank you very much.
That's fine. I think you might find on this recording that
Okay.
I'm staying stable and that you're disappearing. So let on behalf of Chris and me, because I think he's disappearing, I'm going to keep talking just to finish off this beautiful podcast. And if in case you can't hear me, you'll hear it on the recording later. Thank you very much for inviting me. What I'd like to do, you are coming in and out. That's okay. So what I'd like to do is just tell you one last nugget of positive psychology and the work I do, which will inspire a song. Okay, I think. So there's a thing, in solutions focused coaching and appreciative inquiry and positive psychology, which is about focusing on what's working, the resources in front of you, and not wasting your time and energy worrying about what isn't there. And I think that's kind of an interesting organizational perspective to have. And there's a true story which leads to my final musical demonstration, which I've probably told you before, which is the story of Keith Jarrett in 1975 when
Ah,
he
yeah.
turned up at the Opera House in Cologne to give a solo piano performance, improvised, 100% improvised. It wasn't Freedom in the Frame; it was just Freedom. And he found that the piano that they gave him was terrible. The real piano wasn't there. There were notes that weren't working. It was out of tune. The pedals weren't working. But he decided to do the concert, and he said, "I'll do this concert because I'm a nice guy. But whatever you do, don't record it. It's going to be a nightmare because this piano is unplayable." However, in a solutions focused, appreciative inquiry, positive psychology kind of way, he found the things that worked. And this is a really important message, I think, that comes out from jazz. And his colleagues ignored him and pressed record. He used to press record in those days. And the recording is a beautiful recording. Listening to this recording of Keith Jarrett playing in a way he'd never played before, because he had to play the bits that worked on the piano. And to this day, this album is still the best-selling solo piano jazz album in history, because it's so remarkable. I could talk a lot longer about that. But I thought, as a way of saying thank you to you, I would like to maybe create, well, I'm not going to compare it to Keith Jarrett or the Cologne concert, but I'll do a mini version of you giving me some constraints so I can only focus on things that work to create a brand new improvised song to say thank you to you. So to do this, I want you to shout out 4 random notes, and I'm going to play you a song to say thank you, which is inspired by the 4 random notes you're about to tell me, and I'm going to write them down on a piece of paper.
Okay.
You know what notes are, Chris? You know what notes are. Just shout out some random notes,
Yeah.
sharps or flats, or whatever you like.
So I definitely want a G in there, and I want a C sharp would be nice. Yeah. I think it'll go nicely with an F. Yeah. And can we? And let's a D. A D.
Okay, so I just wrote down what you said in a fuzzy way: a G, a C sharp, an F, and a D.
Yes,
Right.
please.
So I'm going to finish with the song for you, and I hope you enjoy it. And thank you so much for inviting me along
Thank
today.
you, Alex.
Right, you said a G. I can hear out of this ear. A C sharp. Oh, I like that. That's good. An F. Beautiful. And a D. Oh, wow. Okay, let's do that.
Thank you, Alex.